Some people reveal who they are when the room is watching, but Grace Miller revealed who she was when everyone else looked away. The Sterling room glowed like a jewel above Manhattan, 12 stories up, wrapped in glass, brass, and the soft gold light rich people seemed to carry around like it belonged to them. Outside, rain slid down the windows in silver lines, blurring the city into headlights and shadows. Inside, every table was dressed in white linen, every wine glass stood polished and perfect, and every guest spoke in that low, expensive tone that made silence feel like a rule. Grace moved between them with a tray balanced on one hand and a smile she had practiced in the bathroom mirror before her shift. She was 26, white, tired, and 2 missed paychecks away from losing the tiny apartment she shared with her mother in Queens, but none of that was allowed to show. Not here. Not under Brittany Vale's sharp eyes. Brittany, the floor manager, stood near the host's stand in a black dress and a headset, smiling at guests like they were royalty and cutting down employees like they were furniture. Table 7 needs sparkling water, Grace, she said without looking at her. And try not to look so nervous tonight. We have investors in the room. Grace nodded. Yes, ma'am. Her shoes pinched. Her back ached. The small silver pin on her apron, shaped like an old-fashioned lantern, caught the light as she turned. It had belonged to her father, a hotel doorman who used to come home with sore feet and stories about people who never noticed him. A door only matters if it opens for everyone, he would say, tapping that little pin with one finger. Grace touched it now, just once, then kept walking. That was when she noticed the man by the window. He sat alone at the smallest table, shoulders slightly hunched, both hands wrapped around a plain black coffee like he needed the warmth more than the caffeine. He was white, maybe mid-30s, with dark blonde hair still damp from the rain and a quiet face that did not match the room. His coat was clean but worn at the cuffs. His boots were plain. No watch flashing under his sleeve. No phone on the table. No polished confidence. Just a man trying to take up as little space as possible in a place built to measure people by how much space they could own. Grace had served him 20 minutes earlier. He had looked her in the eye, thanked her by name, and left a $5 bill folded neatly beneath the saucer even though he had ordered nothing else. That alone made him kinder than half the room. Then Kyle Mercer arrived. Grace knew him before Brittany whispered his name with fake excitement. Kyle was the son of a major investor, the kind of man who wore charm like cologne and cruelty like a private joke. He swept in with 3 friends, laughing too loudly, rain still shining on his expensive coat. Brittany rushed to greet him. Mr. Mercer, we saved your usual table. Kyle's eyes drifted past her and landed on the quiet man by the window. His smile changed. It got smaller, meaner. Who is that? He asked. Brittany followed his gaze, and Grace saw the panic flicker across her face, quick as a match flame. Just a walk-in. A walk-in? Kyle chuckled. Here. His friends laughed with him, though nothing was funny yet. He walked toward the quiet man's table, slow and casual, like he already owned the answer to every question. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. She lifted a pitcher of water and moved closer, pretending to check table settings. Kyle stopped beside the man and glanced at the coffee cup. Long night. The man looked up calmly. Something like that. His voice was low, even, almost gentle. Kyle tilted his head toward the worn coat. This place has standards. Maybe try the shelter down the street next time. A hush fell over the nearby tables. Not full silence. Not enough for anyone to be responsible. Just that ugly little pause people make when they want to watch but not help. The quiet man did not answer. He only lowered his eyes to his coffee, his jaw tightening once, then stilling. Brittany stepped in fast, smile frozen. Sir, I am so sorry, but we may need this table for a reservation. Grace knew there was no reservation. She had checked the floor chart herself. The table was open for the next hour. The man reached for his wallet. I paid already. That is not the issue, Brittany said softly, the way people sound polite when they are doing something shameful. Kyle smirked. No, the issue is fit. Some people just do not fit. Grace's fingers curled around the water pitcher handle. She thought about rent. She thought about her mother's eye surgery estimate folded in her purse. She thought about Brittany's warning. We have investors in the room. Then she looked at the man's hands, steady but cold around the cup, and something in her father's old words rose inside her like a light switching on. Grace stepped forward. She set the pitcher down on the nearest service station, walked straight to Kyle's table, and placed a clean white napkin in front of him with careful, trembling precision. Then maybe you should learn some standards before judging his. The room went completely quiet. Brittany's face lost color. Kyle blinked, as if a chair had started speaking. Excuse me. Grace's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice came out clear. He paid for his coffee. He spoke respectfully. He bothered no one. If this room has standards, Mr. Mercer, respect should be the first one. One of Kyle's friends gave a nervous laugh and looked away. Brittany hissed, Grace. But Grace did not move. The quiet man slowly lifted his eyes to her. For the first time all night, something changed in his face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Like he had been waiting to see whether kindness still existed when it cost something. Kyle leaned back, his smile gone thin. Do you know who I am? Grace swallowed. Yes, sir. She touched the lantern pin on her apron. But I also know who I am. Outside, thunder rolled softly over Manhattan. Inside the Sterling room, every polished glass reflected the same impossible scene, a waitress with everything to lose standing between a powerful guest and a quiet stranger no one thought mattered. And the quiet stranger, Ethan Whitmore, said nothing, because for the first time in months, he was not watching sales numbers, service reports, or investor behavior. He was watching courage. Grace knew the exact second her life could have turned in the wrong direction, because Brittany Vale's smile disappeared like a candle blown out. For a moment, no one moved. The rain tapped the tall windows. Forks rested above plates. Kyle Mercer stared at Grace as if he was trying to decide whether she was brave, foolish, or simply too poor to understand consequences. You must be new, he said at last, his voice smooth enough to sound almost friendly. Grace kept her hands folded in front of her apron, just like the employee handbook required, but her palms were damp. I have been here 8 months, sir. Then you should know better. Brittany stepped between them quickly, her perfume sharp, her headset blinking at her ear. Mr. Mercer, please accept my apology. Grace is overtired. She will not be serving your table tonight. Grace's stomach dropped, but she did not look away from the quiet man by the window. He had not spoken. He had not defended himself. He only watched her with those steady eyes, the kind that missed nothing. That made it harder somehow. If he had begged for help, maybe she could have told herself she had acted on impulse. But he had asked for nothing. He had simply sat there while the room decided his dignity was negotiable. Brittany leaned close to Grace and whispered through her teeth, back hallway. Now. Grace nodded once and turned, feeling every eye follow her. Her shoes clicked across the polished floor, each step sounding too loud. Behind her, Brittany laughed softly for the guests, smoothing the moment back into something expensive people could pretend had never happened. In the back hallway, the golden glow vanished. The walls were beige, the floor smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the sound of the dining room became a muffled hum. Brittany rounded on her. Have you lost your mind? Grace took one breath. He was being humiliated. He was being handled. He was a guest. Brittany's eyes narrowed. He ordered one coffee and took a table during investor night. Kyle Mercer's family could decide whether this restaurant stays open next quarter. Grace pressed her lips together. She knew what Brittany meant. Rich comfort mattered. Poor discomfort did not. I understand that, Grace said carefully, but we cannot throw someone out because his coat looks old. Brittany gave a short laugh without humor. We? Grace, there is no we. There is ownership, management, and staff. You are staff. And staff does not lecture guests who spend more on dinner than you make in a week. The words landed where they were meant to land. Grace felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but she forced it down. Crying at work was a luxury she had never been able to afford. Brittany picked up the schedule clipboard from a metal shelf and crossed something out with a red pen. You are off the private brunch tomorrow. That was a double shift. You are also off Friday night unless I decide otherwise. Grace stared at the red line through her name. That double shift was supposed to cover the electric bill. Friday night tips were supposed to go toward the deposit for her mother's eye surgery. She saw the numbers in her head because she carried them everywhere. $1,100 past due on rent. $284 for utilities. $72 left on her grocery card. A medical estimate folded in the side pocket of her purse, the paper already soft from being opened and closed too many times. Brittany, please, Grace said quieter now. I need those hours. Brittany's expression softened for half a second, not with compassion, but with satisfaction. Then you should have thought of that before you made a scene. Grace looked down at the lantern pin on her apron. It was slightly crooked from the rush of service. She straightened it with trembling fingers. Her father had worn that pin through 30 years of opening doors at the old Fairmont on 59th Street. He had stood in summer heat and February snow, greeting executives, tourists, brides, bellhops, and men who slept on benches. Same smile for all of them. Same open door. When Grace was little, she used to wait for him near the lobby at the end of his shift, watching people pass him without a glance. He never seemed bitter. People show you their character by how they treat someone they do not need, he told her once on the subway ride home. Remember that, Gracie. She remembered it now with a sharpness that hurt. Brittany tapped the clipboard. Finish polishing silverware, then go home. And if Mr. Mercer complains again, I will not be able to protect you. Grace almost laughed at that. Protect her. As if Brittany had ever stood between Grace and anything except a paycheck. She returned to the service station and began polishing knives with a white cloth, one after another, until her reflection blurred in the metal. Through the narrow doorway, she could see the dining room. Kyle was laughing again. Brittany was pouring wine at his table. The quiet man still sat by the window, his coffee untouched now. For one brief second, his eyes found Grace across the distance. He did not smile. He did not nod. But he lifted the $5 bill from beneath his saucer and placed it carefully beside the cup where she would see it. Not as charity. Not as payment. As acknowledgement. Grace swallowed hard and looked away before Brittany noticed. When the shift ended, she changed in the employee restroom, counted the tips in her pocket, and came up $17 short of what she had hoped. Her phone buzzed with a message from her landlord asking when he could expect payment. Another message from her mother followed, sweet and apologetic, saying her vision was blurrier tonight, but not to worry. Grace stood under the fluorescent light, still in her black work pants, holding the phone so tightly her knuckles paled. She wanted to be practical. She wanted to be the kind of person who stayed quiet, kept hours, paid bills, survived. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the man by the window, alone in a room full of people, and heard Kyle's voice saying some people just did not fit. Grace opened her eyes and touched the lantern pin again. I am sorry, Dad, she whispered, though she was not sure whether she was apologizing for risking everything or for wishing, just once, that doing the right thing did not cost so much. By the time Grace stepped out of the service entrance, Manhattan had turned silver with rain, and the city smelled like wet pavement, exhaust, and the kind of cold that slips under your collar before you can stop it. She had planned to take the subway straight home, count her money again on the train, and decide which bill could wait without becoming a disaster. Instead, she stopped under the narrow back awning of the Sterling room and found the quiet man standing 10 feet away near the alley light, his worn coat dark at the shoulders from the rain. He had not left through the front. Of course he had not. Men like Kyle Mercer were escorted to town cars beneath umbrellas. Men like this were expected to disappear through side doors and bad weather. Grace hesitated with one hand still on the metal handle behind her. He turned when he heard it click shut. For a second, neither of them spoke. The restaurant glowed above them, all glass and gold, while down here the dumpsters hummed, steam rose from a street grate, and rain drummed on the fire escape. He looked smaller out here, not because he was weak, but because the city had a way of making anyone without shine look invisible. You did not have to do that, he said quietly. Grace gave a tired half-smile. That seems to be everyone's opinion tonight. His mouth softened, almost into a smile, then faded. I am sorry it cost you. Grace looked away. She did not want pity. Pity felt too close to being studied, and she had been studied enough inside that dining room. You hurt? Enough. Then you know I may have just lost 2 shifts over 1 cup of coffee. The words came out sharper than she meant. She regretted them immediately, but he did not flinch. He only nodded, accepting the truth without trying to smooth it over. That made her trust him a little more and resent him a little for it. Rain slid off the awning in a steady line between them. Grace opened her small black umbrella, the cheap kind from a drugstore that bent whenever the wind got confident. She stepped closer and held it toward him. Take this. He looked at the umbrella, then at her. You need it. I have a hood. That coat of yours is already soaked, and yours is not exactly winning awards. The quiet man glanced down at himself, and for the first time, she saw the tear near the lapel, a clean little rip where the fabric had pulled loose. Maybe Kyle had noticed it too. Maybe that was why he had picked him. Some people found the smallest opening and used it as permission to be cruel. Grace felt an old anger rise in her, calm and steady. Not loud, just bright. She reached for the lantern pin on her apron. The silver was warm from her body, the tiny metal lamp worn smooth where her father's thumb had touched it for years. Her fingers paused. This pin was not expensive. It would not pay rent or buy groceries or fix anything practical. But it was the one thing she owned that reminded her she came from someone honorable. She unfastened it anyway. "Here," she said. He stepped back slightly. "No, I cannot take that. You can borrow it." She moved closer before she could change her mind and pinned it carefully to the torn part of his coat, securing the fabric just enough to make it look intentional. Her hands were cold, but she kept them steady. Up close, she noticed things she had missed in the dining room. His eyes were gray, not flat or tired, but watchful in a way that felt almost heavy. His face was clean-shaven beneath the rain and shadow. His hands looked more like they belonged to an office than a shelter. Still, none of that mattered. He had been treated like nothing, and nothing in his eyes had asked to be rescued. "There," she said, stepping back. "Now it looks like you meant to wear it." He touched the pin with 2 fingers, careful, almost reverent. "What is it?" "My father's. He was a doorman at a hotel for 30 years. And he gave this to you. After he retired. He said every door in America should open the same way, whether someone arrives in a limousine or in wet shoes." The man was silent for a long moment. The rain filled the space between them. "He sounds like a good man." Grace nodded, and the ache in her throat surprised her. He was. A cab rolled by at the mouth of the alley, tires whispering through puddles. Far above, laughter spilled from the rooftop bar like it belonged to another world. Grace shifted her bag higher on her shoulder. "Why did you stay so quiet in there?" she asked before she could stop herself. "You could have said something. You could have told them they were wrong." His eyes lowered to the pin. "Sometimes silence shows you more than an argument does." Grace studied him. "That sounds like something a person says when they have the luxury of waiting." The words landed between them, honest and uncomfortable. He looked up, and this time there was pain in his expression, quick but real. "You are right." She had not expected that. Most people defended themselves. Rich people deflected. Poor people explained. This man simply received the truth and let it change the air. Grace pulled her hood over her hair and offered him the umbrella again. "Keep it until the rain stops." "What about you?" "I have survived worse weather than this." He took the umbrella slowly, not like a man taking charity, but like someone accepting a responsibility. "At least tell me your name." "Grace Miller." "Grace," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I am Ethan." "No last name. No story. Just Ethan." She nodded. "Get home safe, Ethan." He looked down at the lantern pin once more. Why defend a stranger? Grace's hand tightened around the strap of her bag. She glanced back at the glowing restaurant, at the place that had already decided what courage was worth, then looked at him again. Because everyone else was watching. Then she stepped out from under the awning and into the rain, walking fast toward the subway stairs, leaving Ethan beneath the bent umbrella with her father's silver lantern pinned to his coat, and a silence that no longer felt empty. The next morning, Grace woke before sunrise to the sound of her mother moving slowly in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other reaching for the kettle by memory more than sight. The apartment in Queens was small enough that every sound belonged to both of them. The radiator clicking, the neighbors upstairs walking across old floorboards, the city bus sighing at the curb below. Grace washed her face with cold water, pinned her hair back, and stared at the empty spot on her apron where the silver lantern should have been. For a moment, panic touched her chest. Then she remembered Ethan standing under the awning, his coat torn, his eyes quiet, her father's pin catching the alley light. She told herself it was only borrowed. She told herself she would see it again. Still, when she buttoned her uniform, she felt strangely exposed, as if she had left a small piece of her courage outside in the rain. Her mother, Linda, sat at the tiny table with a mug between both hands. She was white, soft-spoken, and trying very hard to pretend the blurry edges of the world did not frighten her. "You are leaving early," Linda said. Grace smiled too quickly. "I picked up some prep hours." It was not exactly a lie. It was a hope dressed up as a sentence. Brittany had cut her shifts, but Grace planned to arrive early anyway, volunteer for whatever work no one wanted, and remind management she was useful enough not to erase. Linda reached across the table, searching slightly before finding Grace's wrist. Your father used to do that. Show up early when he was worried. Grace covered her mother's hand. Then I come by it honestly. On the subway, she stood between a man reading the financial section and a college student asleep against her backpack. Grace watched the tunnel lights flash over the windows and counted bills in her mind. Rent, medicine, groceries, electricity. The numbers did not care that she had been brave. By 9 in the morning, she was in the service corridor of the Sterling room, folding napkins into sharp little peaks, while Brittany spoke to her like she was a stain that had not come out. You are lucky I did not terminate you last night, Brittany said, checking the brunch reservations on her tablet. Mr. Mercer found your little speech amusing, but amusing does not mean acceptable. I understand. No, Grace. You do not. Poor judgment is contagious. One server acts emotional, then the whole staff forgets their place. Grace kept folding, one corner over the other. Press, turn, fold. She imagined each crease holding back a reply she could not afford to give. Around 10:30, the front door opened, and a draft of cool air moved through the room. Grace looked up. Ethan walked in. The same worn coat, the same calm face. But now, pinned neatly over the repaired tier, her father's silver lantern shone against the dark fabric. Her breath caught before she could stop it. Brittany noticed him too and stiffened. Absolutely not, she muttered. Not again. Grace moved before Brittany could reach the host stand. I can handle it. You will do nothing except keep your head down. But Ethan had already seen Grace. He stepped toward her with the careful politeness of a man entering a church. Good morning. Grace glanced at the pin, then back at him. Good morning. I wanted to return this. His fingers touched the lantern, but he did not unfasten it yet. And the umbrella. It survived the wind better than expected. He held out the folded umbrella. One rib was bent, exactly as it had been before. Grace took it, unable to hide a small smile. That is because it already knew hardship. His eyes warmed. So did its owner, I think. She looked away, busying herself with the coffee station. You want another black coffee? If it is not too much trouble. It is $4.50 of trouble. Fair. He sat at the same window table, though the room was nearly empty. Grace poured the coffee herself. Brittany watched from across the floor, lips pressed thin, but said nothing yet. When Grace set the cup down, Ethan placed a $5 bill beside it. Exact enough, he said. Grace shook her head. You do not have to tip me every time like you are apologizing for existing. I was apologizing for yesterday. Then say that. Do not hide it under a bill. He paused, then nodded. I am sorry for yesterday. Simple. Direct. No performance. Grace studied him for a second. Accepted. Over the next few days, Ethan returned at odd hours. Late morning. Mid-afternoon. Once just before closing, when the city outside had gone purple and gold. He always ordered coffee, sometimes soup, never anything expensive. He said his name was Ethan Cole, and when Grace asked what he did, he looked out the window and said, I am between jobs. She did not push. Everyone had a sentence they used when the truth was too heavy to carry into public. Instead, she refilled his cup when Brittany was not looking and slid him the soup the kitchen would have thrown out anyway. Not with pity. Grace hated pity. She did it the way her father had opened doors, with dignity so quiet it let the other person keep their own. On the fourth day, she found Ethan staring at the rain instead of his coffee. His face looked distant, older somehow, as if the city beyond the glass had pulled him into a memory he did not want. Grace set down a small plate with 2 warm rolls. Do not argue. They were extra. He looked at them, then at her. You feed strangers often? Only the ones who look like they forgot lunch is allowed. A faint smile touched his mouth, then disappeared. Grace leaned one hand on the chair across from him. When was the last time someone asked if you were okay? The question changed him. Not loudly. Nothing dramatic. But his fingers stilled around the cup, and his eyes lifted to hers with a silence so sudden it felt like the whole room had stepped back. For once, Ethan had no ready answer. Grace did not fill the silence. She let him have it. Outside, taxis moved through the rain. Inside, the silver lantern on his coat caught the light between them, no longer just covering a tear, but holding together a secret Grace had not yet learned how to see. By Friday evening, the The Sterling room felt less like a restaurant and more like a stage set for people who liked being seen. Every candle had been trimmed to the same height. Every spoon faced the same direction. Every white tablecloth fell exactly 6 inches from the floor. Brittany walked the room with a tablet pressed to her chest, whispering instructions as if the whole future of Manhattan depended on the placement of bread plates. Grace moved quietly through the rush, carrying water, clearing glasses, smiling when guests smiled first, and keeping one eye on table 12 by the window. Ethan was there again. Same plain black coffee. Same worn coat. Same silver lantern pin catching the light whenever he turned his shoulder. He had returned every day that week, never asking for more than small things, never pushing past the edge of whatever truth he had chosen to hide. Grace had started to look for him before she admitted it to herself, not because she thought he could help her. He looked like someone who needed help more than he could give it, but because when he listened as if her words were not interruptions in his day. That was rare enough to feel dangerous. Grace, Brittany snapped near the service station. Private investor table. Smile. Do not speak unless asked. Do not become memorable. Grace picked up a tray of sparkling water. Yes, ma'am. The investor table was Kyle Mercer's table. Of course it was. He sat with his father's associates and 2 board members from the hospitality group that owned the building. His tie was loosened, his laugh too loud, his confidence polished by people who had never told him no in a way that lasted. When Grace approached, his eyes went straight to her name tag, then to Ethan by the window, then back to her. Well, look at that, Kyle said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The waitress with principles is still employed. Grace poured water into his glass. Good evening, Mr. Mercer. Careful, he said, smiling. That tone almost sounds judgmental. Brittany appeared instantly, her face smooth with panic. Mr. Mercer, is there anything I can get you? Kyle leaned back. Actually, yes. I would like your server to apologize for embarrassing me the other night. Grace's hand tightened around the bottle. Brittany looked at her with a warning that felt like a door closing. Grace. The room narrowed. Grace saw Ethan shift slightly at the window table, but he remained seated. His eyes were on her now, steady, unreadable. She thought of her mother waiting at home with the lights dimmed because bright light hurt her eyes. She thought of the rent notice taped to their apartment door that morning. She thought of the lantern pin on Ethan's coat and her father's voice saying a door only matters if it opens for everyone. Grace set the bottle down. I am sorry the evening became uncomfortable, she said carefully. Kyle smiled. Not enough. Brittany's voice turned thin. Grace, apologize properly. Grace looked at Kyle, then at the quiet man by the window. I am not sorry for asking a guest to be treated with respect. The silence came fast, heavier than before. Kyle's smile vanished. One of the associates coughed into his napkin. Brittany's face hardened in a way that told Grace everything before the words arrived. Go to the office, Brittany said. Grace did not argue. There was no point in begging in front of people who had already decided humility meant surrender. She walked through the dining room with her chin lifted, past Ethan's table, close enough to see his hand resting beside the coffee cup. He did not reach for her. He did not speak. For one terrible second, disappointment cut deeper than fear. She had defended him twice, and still he sat there like a man made of secrets. In the office behind the kitchen, Brittany closed the door and placed Grace's employee file on the desk. You are done. Grace heard the words, but they did not land right away. The office was too bright. The air smelled like printer paper and burnt coffee. On the wall, a framed service motto read, every guest, every time. Grace almost laughed. You are firing me because I refuse to lie. I am firing you because you cannot understand hierarchy. Brittany slid a form across the desk. Sign this. It says you left voluntarily. Grace stared at the paper. Voluntarily. As if she had chosen this. As if bills, surgery estimates, and grocery lists had all politely agreed to wait. No, Grace said. Brittany blinked. Excuse me. I will not sign a lie. Brittany leaned back, anger hidden beneath a professional smile. Then I will make sure every restaurant in this group knows you are difficult. Grace's throat tightened, but her voice did not break. Then tell them I was difficult about dignity. Brittany opened the office door. Take off your name tag. Grace reached for the small black tag on her blouse. Grace Miller. Server. 8 months of double shifts, sore feet, forced smiles, and quiet survival reduced to 2 words on plastic. She unclipped it and placed it on the desk. Her apron felt loose without it. As she stepped into the back hallway, the kitchen staff looked down at their stations, not because they did not care, but because fear had trained them well. Grace walked to her locker, gathered her purse, and folded her apron with hands that shook only once. When she came out through the side corridor, Ethan was standing near the service exit. The silver lantern still shone on his coat. For the first time, Grace felt angry when she saw it. "Do not," she said before he could speak. He stopped. "Grace, do not apologize under another $5 bill. Do not tell me you are sorry it cost me. I know what it cost me." His face changed, and behind the quiet, something heavier moved. "I can fix this." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You cannot even admit what this is." He had no answer. That hurt more than she wanted it to. Grace opened the door to the alley. Rain waited outside again, softer this time, almost kind. Before stepping out, she looked back at him one last time. "Do not let them make you believe you are small, Ethan." Then she left. Ethan remained in the hallway, surrounded by the muffled noise of silverware, voices, and a restaurant that had just punished the only person who understood its soul. Slowly, he touched the lantern pin on his coat. The test was over. And for the first time since he had walked into the Sterling room undercover, Ethan Whitmore knew he had not been measuring Grace Miller at all. She had been measuring him. The first thing Grace did after losing her job was not cry. She made a list. Rent first, because landlords did not accept courage as payment. Medicine second, because her mother had smiled through blurred vision for too long. Food third, because hunger could be negotiated for a day or two if coffee was strong enough and sleep came early. She sat at the small kitchen table in Queens with a yellow legal pad, a pencil worn down to half its size, and the kind of silence that follows bad news into a home. Her mother sat across from her, pretending to read a paperback held too close to her face. Grace had told her the restaurant was restructuring. Linda Miller had listened, nodded, and said nothing for almost a minute. Then she reached across the table and found Grace's hand. "Your father lost a job once for opening the front door to a man the manager wanted sent around back," she said softly. Grace looked up. "He never told me that." He was not proud of losing the job. He was proud he did not lose himself. That was when Grace almost broke, but the knock came before the tears did. 3 gentle taps. Not the landlord's hard impatience. Not a neighbor. Grace stood slowly, crossed the narrow living room, and opened the door with the safety chain still latched. A woman in a navy coat stood in the hallway, white, professional, with silver-framed glasses and a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. "Grace Miller." "Yes. My name is Claire Donovan. I am with Whitmore Hospitality Group." Grace felt her stomach tighten. The Sterling room was part of that group. Brittany had moved fast. "If this is about a termination form, I already refused to sign it." Claire's expression did not change, but something kind touched her eyes. "I am not here for that. I was asked to deliver this personally." She slid a cream-colored envelope through the gap beneath the chain. Grace took it, but did not open the door farther. Asked by whom? Claire hesitated just long enough for Grace to notice. "The executive office." Then she handed over a small black car service card. "A driver will be waiting downstairs tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The meeting is at Whitmore Tower." Grace gave a humorless breath. "I cannot afford whatever this is." "There is no cost to you." "There is always a cost." Claire lowered her voice. "I understand why you would think that. Please come anyway." Then she turned and walked down the hall, leaving Grace with an envelope heavy enough to feel like a decision. Inside was a formal invitation for an interview, printed on thick paper that seemed absurd in her kitchen with its chipped mugs and flickering overhead light. No position listed. No explanation. Only her name, the address of Whitmore Tower, and a time. Linda listened as Grace read it aloud. "You should go," she said. Grace stared at the page. "What if Brittany is setting me up? Then wear clean shoes and make her regret underestimating you." The next morning, Grace borrowed her mother's black wool coat, pinned her hair into a neat twist, and rode down in the elevator with her heart beating too fast. A black sedan waited at the curb. The driver held the door with more respect than anyone at the Sterling room had shown her all week. The ride into Manhattan felt unreal. Queens blurred into the bridge into glass towers into streets where everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Grace looked down at her hands in her lap and noticed the small pale mark on her apron finger where the lantern pin used to brush her skin. At 9:45, the sedan stopped in front of Whitmore Tower. The building rose 70 stories above 6th Avenue, all blue glass and clean steel, with revolving doors shining beneath a silver sign. Grace stepped out and felt very small. Not weak, just aware of scale. Inside, the lobby stretched upward in white marble and quiet wealth. A wall of digital screens displayed hotel properties from across the country: Boston, Chicago, Miami, Denver, San Francisco. Then the images shifted to a corporate welcome message, and Grace stopped walking. On the center screen was a portrait of a man in a black suit, shoulders squared, gray eyes calm, dark blonde hair neatly styled. The name beneath it was impossible and perfectly clear: Ethan Whitmore, founder and chief executive officer. For a second, the entire lobby seemed to tilt. Grace heard the echo of rain in an alley. I am Ethan. Not Ethan Cole. Not between jobs. Not the quiet man with one cup of coffee and a torn coat. Ethan Whitmore, the man whose company owned the Sterling Room, whose signature probably sat above Brittany's entire career, whose silence had not been helpless at all. Grace turned toward the exit. The elevator doors opened before she could take 3 steps. Ethan stood inside, not in the worn coat this time, but in a tailored black suit, white shirt, no tie. He looked like the portrait, but more human, more tired, more guilty. On his left lapel, shining softly against the expensive fabric, was her father's silver lantern pin. Grace could not speak. Anger came first, hot and clean. Then embarrassment. Then the memory of every cup of coffee, every honest conversation, every moment she had believed she was protecting someone powerless. Ethan stepped out of the elevator but kept a respectful distance. Grace. She looked at the pin, then at his face. You lied. He did not deny it. Yes. You let me think you had nothing. I did. You let me defend you. His voice lowered. You defended a stranger. That is not the same thing. It is when the stranger owns the building. The words struck harder than she expected. People at the reception desk pretended not to listen. Security pretended not to look. Ethan absorbed it all without flinching. You were invited here because what happened to you was wrong. I want to correct it. Grace shook her head. Correct it? Like a billing error? No. Like a failure of leadership. That stopped her for half a breath, but not enough. You should have remembered that before I was fired. Ethan's hand moved slightly toward the lantern pin, then dropped. You are right. The elevator waited open behind him, polished and silent. Grace could see her reflection in its mirrored doors, borrowed coat, tired eyes, chin raised because lowering it would cost too much. Ethan looked at her as if the entire tower had become background. I am asking for 20 minutes, he said. Not to excuse myself, to show you the truth. Grace almost walked out. She imagined the street, the subway, the safety of anger untouched by answers. Then she looked at the silver lantern pinned over his heart. Her father's small light carried into the tallest building she had ever entered, and she hated that it still meant something. 20 minutes, she said, and then you return my pin. Ethan nodded once. Agreed. Grace stepped into the elevator, standing as far from him as the space allowed. As the doors closed, the lobby disappeared, and the tower began to rise beneath her feet, carrying her toward a truth she was not sure she wanted and a man she was no longer sure she knew. The elevator rose so quietly that Grace could hear her own breathing, and somehow that made the silence worse. Ethan stood beside the control panel with both hands clasped in front of him. No phone, no assistant, no polished speech prepared on a tablet. Just the man from the rain and the man from the lobby existing in the same body, and Grace did not know which one made her angrier. At the 68th floor, the doors opened into a private corridor lined with pale wood, soft lights, and framed photographs of hotels that looked more like palaces than places where people worked until their feet went numb. A receptionist stood as they passed, but Ethan gave one small shake of his head, and no one followed. He led Grace into a conference room with windows overlooking Manhattan from so high up that taxis looked like yellow beads moving through gray ribbons of street. On the long table sat a folder with her name printed on it. Grace stopped at the sight. You have a file on me. Ethan looked at the folder, then back at her. Human Resources compiled your employment record after last night. That makes me feel so much better. He accepted the sarcasm without defense. I deserve that. Grace remained standing. You have 17 minutes. Ethan did not sit either. He opened the folder and turned it toward her, but did not push it closer. Your termination has been reversed. Your record has been cleared. Brittany Vale submitted false documentation claiming you abandoned your position. That has been rejected. Grace stared at the papers, then forced her eyes away. Relief tried to rise inside her, but anger stood in front of it. And what am I supposed to say? Thank you for undoing the thing your company should never have allowed. No, Ethan's voice was quiet. You are not supposed to thank me. That answer unsettled her because it was not the one powerful people usually gave. He reached for another document. The Sterling Room is one of 16 properties I have been auditing undercover for the past 3 months. We received reports about class-based discrimination, mistreatment of staff, and guests being removed because they did not look profitable enough. I wanted to see it without warning anyone. Grace looked at the skyline. So you let people show you who they were? Yes. And when they showed you, you kept watching. The words landed hard. Ethan's face tightened, not with offense, but with recognition. Yes. Grace turned back to him. You watched Kyle humiliate you. You watched Brittany threaten me. You watched me lose shifts I needed. Then you watched me get fired. I did. Why? For the first time, Ethan looked away. Not far. Just down at the silver lantern pin on his lapel. Because I thought evidence mattered more than intervention. Because I have spent years fixing problems from boardrooms after enough proof was collected to make the decision safe. Because somewhere along the way, I became better at documenting harm than stopping it. Grace felt the sentence move through the room, honest and ugly. She wanted it to be an excuse so she could reject it easily. It was not. It was worse. It was the truth. Ethan unpinned the lantern carefully and placed it on the table between them. The small silver lamp looked fragile against the dark wood. Your father's pin reminded me of something I had forgotten. Hotels are not buildings. They are promises. A door. A bed. A light left on. Safety for one night. Dignity at the threshold. My company has been selling luxury while forgetting service. Grace swallowed, but her voice stayed sharp. Do not use my father to make this poetic. Ethan went still. You are right. I am sorry. He opened a second folder. I also asked you here because I want to offer you a position, not at the Sterling Room. At Whitmore Hospitality. Leadership development, full salary, benefits starting immediately, medical coverage that includes family dependents, and tuition support if you choose to study hospitality design. Grace stared at him. The words seemed to arrive from another planet. Full salary, benefits, medical coverage, tuition. Each one touched a fear she had carried for years. Her mother's eyes. The landlord. The dream she had folded smaller and smaller until it fit inside a drawer. For one dangerous second, hope stepped forward. Then she remembered the alley. The coffee. His silence. No, Ethan blinked once. No. No, Grace, you do not have to decide now. I just did. His brow furrowed, but he did not move closer. May I ask why? She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Because you still think this is something you can correct with a better offer. You think if the number is high enough, the damage becomes professional development. That is not what I mean, but it is what it feels like. Her hand hovered near the pin, but she did not pick it up. When I defended you, I thought you were a man being treated like he did not belong. I did not do it for a job. I did not do it to impress a chief executive officer hiding behind a coffee cup. I did it because nobody else would. And now standing here, in this tower, I feel like my courage has been turned into a performance review. Ethan's face changed. The chief executive disappeared completely then. No command. No calculation. Just a man realizing he had mistaken admiration for repair. I never meant to make you feel used. Grace's eyes burned, but she refused to let tears make her argument smaller. Intent does not pay for impact. He nodded slowly. No, it does not. The room fell quiet. Below them, the city kept moving as if nothing sacred had cracked above it. Grace picked up the lantern pin at last and closed it in her palm. My father opened doors for people who never knew his name. He believed dignity was not a reward. It was the beginning. If you want to fix your company, start there. Not with me. Not by turning me into your redemption story. Ethan looked at her with something like grief. Then what can I do? Grace stepped toward the door. Tell the truth. Publicly. Without making yourself the hero. She paused with her hand on the handle. And Ethan? Yes. Do not test kindness again. You may not like what it reveals about you. Then she left him standing in the conference room, with the folder still open, the offer untouched, and the first real consequence of his silence finally sitting across from him, even after she was gone. Grace did not expect Ethan to listen, because men who own towers usually heard criticism the way glass heard rain, briefly, lightly, and from the safe side. But 2 days after she walked out of Whitmore Tower, her phone rang while she was sorting coupons at the kitchen table. The number was unfamiliar. She almost ignored it. Then she saw her mother across the room, holding a medicine bottle close to the lamp so she could read the label, and Grace answered. Grace Miller speaking. Claire Donovan's calm voice came through. Miss Miller, I know you did not ask for another call, but Mr. Whitmore is holding a public accountability meeting tomorrow morning with the board, senior leadership, and representatives from every property in the Northeast Division. He asked me to invite you. Grace closed her eyes. I already said no to the job. This is not about the job. Claire paused. He is doing what you told him to do. He is telling the truth. The meeting took place in the main auditorium on the 32nd floor of Whitmore Tower, a wide room with curved rows of seats, warm wood walls, and a screen so large it made every face look impossible to ignore. Grace arrived in her own black coat this time, not her mother's, and kept her father's lantern pin closed inside her fist. She had not decided whether to wear it. Some part of her feared Ethan would use it again as a symbol, and she was tired of symbols being easier for powerful people than change. The room was already half full. Executives in tailored suits spoke in low voices. Hotel managers checked their phones. Human resources staff sat with legal pads ready. At the front, Brittany Vale stood near the aisle with her arms folded, pale but composed, whispering to a man from corporate operations. Kyle Mercer was there too, seated beside his father's representative, looking bored in a navy blazer as if the entire meeting was an inconvenience placed on his calendar by lesser people. When Grace entered, conversations thinned. Heads turned. She felt the attention hit her like cold air, but she kept walking. Claire met her near the front and offered a seat in the first row. Grace chose one at the aisle instead, close enough to hear, far enough to leave. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ethan walked onto the stage. No dramatic entrance. No music. No entourage. Just Ethan in a charcoal suit, face serious, hands empty. He stood behind the podium for 1 second, then stepped away from it, as if he did not want furniture between him and the truth. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice carried through the room, steady but not polished smooth. This meeting is being recorded. Not for marketing. Not for internal image management. For accountability. A murmur moved through the auditorium. Ethan looked toward the back, then to the front row, then finally to Grace. Only for a moment. Long enough to acknowledge her. Not long enough to make her the display. For the past 3 months, I conducted undercover audits in several Whitmore properties after repeated complaints about discrimination, staff intimidation, and selective service based on perceived wealth. I believed I was gathering evidence. I was. But I also failed to intervene when intervention was morally required. The room went still. Grace felt her fingers tighten around the pen. Ethan turned to the screen. I am going to show you one incident from the Sterling room. The people in this footage are not examples. They are people. Remember that before judging anyone except the system that allowed this behavior to feel normal. The screen lit with security footage from the dining room. No sound at first. Grace saw herself in uniform, moving between tables. She saw Ethan by the window in the worn coat. She saw Kyle lean over him, laughing. Then subtitles appeared from the audio transcript. Clean white words on a dark strip. This place has standards. Maybe try the shelter down the street next time. A low, uncomfortable breath passed through the room. Brittany looked down. Kyle shifted in his seat. The footage continued. Grace watched herself step forward, small on that giant screen, a server with a water pitcher and too much to lose. Then maybe you should learn some standards before judging his. Seeing it from outside her own body made her chest ache. She had felt terrified in that moment. On the screen, she looked steady. Ethan paused the video there, not on Kyle's face, not on his own, but on Grace standing between them. This employee was removed from shifts, pressured to apologize for telling the truth, and later terminated under false documentation. Brittany stood abruptly. That is not the whole context. Ethan turned to her, not unkindly, but without yielding. You will have a chance to respond in the formal review. Not here. Not before the person you try to silence is heard. Grace's heart stumbled. Ethan looked toward her, but he did not invite her like a performer. He simply said, "Miss Miller, you do not owe this room anything. But if you want to speak, the floor is yours." Every eye turned. For a second, Grace stayed seated. Her mother's voice came back to her. "Wear clean shoes and make her regret underestimating you." Her father's voice followed. "A door only matters if it opens for everyone." Grace stood. The walk to the front felt longer than any subway platform, any service hallway, any rainy alley. Ethan moved aside. He did not touch her arm. He did not whisper encouragement. He gave her space. Grace placed the lantern pin on the podium, not wearing it, not offering it, simply letting it be seen. "My father was a doorman for 30 years, she began. Her voice trembled once, then found itself. "He opened doors for people who sometimes thanked him and sometimes looked through him. He told me dignity was not something a person earned by dressing well. It was something we owed each other before we knew anything else." She looked out at the room. At the Sterling room, I watched a guest get measured by his coat. I watched managers protect money faster than they protected people. I watched coworkers lower their eyes because they were afraid their bills would punish them for having a conscience. And I understand that fear because I had it too. No one moved. Grace turned slightly toward the executives. "You cannot build a hospitality company on luxury alone. A chandelier does not make a room welcoming. Marble floors do not make a guest respected. Real service begins when the person in front of you has nothing to offer but their humanity, and you still treat that as enough." Kyle gave a small scoff, too quiet for most people, but not for the microphone. Grace looked directly at him. "Some people confuse being served with being superior. They are not the same thing." This time, no one laughed with him. Ethan stepped forward only after Grace left the podium. Effective immediately, Brittany Vale is suspended pending final review. Kyle Mercer and his party are banned from all Whitmore properties for guest misconduct. The Mercer investment agreement is terminated under our ethics clause. And starting today, every Whitmore employee has the protected right to refuse service to any guest who demeans, harasses, or discriminates against staff or other guests. The room erupted, not loudly at first, but with a wave of shocked voices, chairs shifting, whispers breaking into open conversation. Grace returned to her aisle seat, but before she sat, one of the kitchen supervisors from the Sterling room stood at the back and began clapping. Then a housekeeper from another property joined. Then a front desk manager. Then more hands, until the sound filled the auditorium like rain finally becoming thunder. Grace looked down at the lantern pin in her palm. For the first time in days, it did not feel like something lost, borrowed, or used. It felt like something lit. 6 months later, the front doors of the Sterling room opened before noon for the first time in its history, not for investors, celebrities, or private reservations, but for housekeepers, servers, front desk clerks, line cooks, bell attendants, security guards, dishwashers, and trainees from every Whitmore property within 200 miles of New York City. The white tablecloths were gone. The room looked warmer without them, less like a museum and more like a place where people could breathe. Sunlight moved through the tall windows instead of candlelight. Coffee sat in silver urns near the bar. Name tags rested on a welcome table beside notebooks embossed with 3 simple words: "Open Door Standard." Grace stood near the host's stand in a navy dress and low heels, still uncomfortable with the way people looked to her for direction, but no longer shrinking from it. Her new title was Director of Guest Dignity and Service Culture, though she still smiled whenever someone called her Grace from training. The job had not come as a reward wrapped in guilt. She had accepted it only after Ethan agreed to 3 conditions. First, she would report directly to a board ethics committee, not to his personal office. Second, every policy would be built with hourly staff at the table. Third, no story about her would ever be used in advertising. Ethan had agreed before she finished speaking. Then he had done something she had not expected. He stepped back. He gave her budget, staff, authority, and room. He did not hover. He did not turn her work into his redemption. He learned, sometimes awkwardly, that respect was quieter than rescue. That morning, Grace watched a young server from Boston practice how to refuse service politely when a guest insulted a coworker. Across the room, a former night auditor from Philadelphia described how fear made employees swallow things they should have been allowed to report. A dishwasher from Newark stood at the microphone and said, voice shaking, that he had never been asked what dignity meant at work before. Grace listened to all of them. She wrote notes. She asked questions. She made sure the room opened for everyone. Near the entrance, where guests once waited to be judged by reservation time and wardrobe, a new bronze plaque had been installed. Beneath it, in a small glass frame, rested her father's silver lantern pin. It had been polished, but not too much. Grace had insisted on that. The worn edges mattered. The tiny scratches mattered. They proved it had been carried by hands that worked. Under the frame, the inscription read, "A door only matters if it opens for everyone." Linda Miller had cried when she saw it for the first time, though she blamed the brightness of the lobby. Her surgery had gone well in May. She could now read street signs from half a block away, and she had developed the habit of pretending not to notice whenever Ethan looked at Grace like he had found a light he did not deserve but intended to honor. Grace noticed anyway. She noticed him now, standing near the back of the room in a simple gray suit, listening to a table of trainees instead of speaking over them. He had changed in ways that did not announce themselves. He took fewer private elevators. He visited kitchens before boardrooms. He asked employees what policy looked like at 2 o'clock in the morning, not just what it sounded like in a presentation. He still had a quietness to him, but it no longer felt like hiding. It felt like attention. After the training ended, after the notebooks were collected and the last staff members drifted toward the elevators with coffee cups and new confidence, Grace stayed behind to straighten the welcome table. Ethan approached slowly, carrying a small envelope and a narrow velvet box. Grace saw both and lifted one eyebrow. That better not be what it looks like. Ethan stopped, then looked down at the box. It is not. Good. Because if you propose to me in front of a corporate training plaque, I may resign on principle. His laugh was soft, almost startled, and it warmed the empty room. Noted. He handed her the envelope first. Inside was a brass key attached to a tag engraved with the words Miller Center for Open Door Leadership. Grace stared at it. Ethan, it is not a gift to you, he said quickly, then corrected himself. No, that sounds wrong. It is a commitment to the work. A training center in Queens. Public workshops, hospitality scholarships, staff leadership programs, legal support for service workers facing retaliation. The board approved funding for 10 years. It will be named after your father only if you and your mother want that. Grace looked toward the framed lantern by the door. For a moment, the room blurred. Not from sadness. From the strange tenderness of seeing an old promise grow into walls, classrooms, salaries, and open doors. You did this without telling me. I developed the proposal without telling you. Nothing moves forward without your approval. She looked back at him. That difference mattered. He knew it mattered. Then he opened the velvet box. Inside was not a ring. It was the original name tag she had placed on Brittany's desk the night she was fired. Grace Miller. Server. The plastic had been cleaned and set into a small silver frame. I found it in storage, Ethan said. I thought you should decide what happens to it. Grace took the frame with both hands. The name tag felt heavier now, not because of what she had lost, but because of what she had refused to surrender. She smiled through the ache in her chest. I want it at the center, she said, next to the first classroom door. Ethan nodded. Then that is where it goes. The city glowed beyond the windows, bright and busy, still unfair in 1,000 ways, still full of rooms where people looked away. But this room had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, enough to matter. Grace stepped closer, the key warm in her palm. No more tests, she asked. Ethan looked at her, and there was no performance in his eyes now, no hidden role, no quiet experiment. No more tests, he said. Only truth. Only action. For as long as you let me stand beside you. Grace held his gaze for a long second, then reached for his hand. Not as a rescue, not as a reward, as a choice. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, beside a door that finally opened the right way, Grace Miller let herself believe that love, like leadership, was not proven by status, but by what a person did when someone else's dignity was on the line.